10 stories of Joel McCrea's remarkable life. He delivered newspapers to Cecil B. DeMille's front door. He met the real Wyatt Earp while still in college. He took financial advice from Will Rogers, bought 1,000 acres of California dirt when nobody wanted it, and turned it into a fortune that dwarfed anything Hollywood ever paid him. He made over 90 films. He worked with Alfred Hitchcock, Preston Sturges, William Wyler, and Sam Peckinpah. He starred opposite Barbara Stanwyck, Veronica Lake, Claudette Colbert, and Frances D., the woman he married and stayed married to for 57 years until the day he died on their anniversary. But here's what set Joel McCrea apart from every other leading man of the Golden Age. When the IRS questioned why he listed rancher as his occupation and acting as his hobby, he showed the agent the calluses on his hands and said, "I didn't get those on a Hollywood set." The agent left satisfied. He never won an Oscar. He was never even nominated. Katharine Hepburn thought that was a disgrace. And yet his best films are preserved in the Library of Congress. His ranch is on the National Register of Historic Places. And film historians still argue he belongs in the same conversation as Gary Cooper and Jimmy Stewart. These are the documented moments that made Joel McCrea one of the most remarkable figures Hollywood ever produced. Let's begin. Number 1. The paperboy who grew up with Hollywood's founding fathers. On November 5th, 1905, Joel Albert McCrea was born in South Pasadena, California. His father, Thomas McCrea, worked as an executive with the Los Angeles Gas and Electric Company. His mother, Rose Louise Whipple McCrea, was a Christian Science practitioner. He had an older brother, John, and a sister, Lois. But the McCrea family history reads like a chapter from the frontier itself. His paternal grandfather, Major John McCrea, drove a stagecoach between San Bernardino and Los Angeles and fought in campaigns against the Apaches. His maternal grandfather, Major Albert Whipple, traveled to California by covered wagon during the 1849 gold rush. McCrea himself said in 1985 that all his ancestors had been frontiersmen. The West wasn't something he learned about from books. It was in his blood. When Joel was about 8 or 9, his family moved to Hollywood back when it was still semi-rural. With the movie industry just starting to take shape, the boy landed a paper route, delivering the Los Angeles Times. You on this customer list reads like a who's who of early cinema. Cecil B. DeMille, Sam Goldwyn, Jesse Lasky, cowboy star William S. Hart, and actor Wallace Reed. That paper route taught him more than punctuality. McCrea later observed, "I learned a good deal about life in Hollywood back then. There were certain stars supposed to be worth millions who couldn't dig up the 60 cents, which the Times cost them at the end of the month." DeMille never forgot his paperboy. Years later on film sets, he loved telling people that McCrea had once delivered his morning paper and remembered the boy placing newspapers carefully on the porch during rainy weather, for which he tipped Joel a silver dollar at Christmas. But it was William S. Hart, America's first great Western movie star, who changed young Joel's life with a single piece of advice. When the boy confided his dream of owning a ranch someday, Hart told him to go into the movies, make money, and buy a ranch, exactly as Hart himself had done. That advice essentially became the blueprint for McCrea's entire life. At Hollywood High School, where classmates included Douglas Fairbanks Jr., McCrea started working as a stunt double for both Hart and Tom Mix. During summers, he was a real cowboy on the King Cattle Company ranch in the Tehachapi Mountains, riding and herding cattle. He attended Pomona College, studied drama, and mission performed at the Pasadena Playhouse alongside future stars Randolph Scott and Robert Young. A drama professor who knew about Joel's ranching dream echoed Hart's advice. Acting might be a faster way to buy a ranch. Think about that. Before Joel McCrea appeared in a single film, 2 different people, a cowboy movie star and a college professor, told him the same thing. Use Hollywood to fund the life you actually want. He listened and he never forgot it. Number 2, the King Kong connection and the dogs who broke character. McCrea's break came while working as an extra on the Jazz Age in 1929, the rare instance of a background player being pulled from the crowd and given a speaking part. DeMille cast him in Dynamite that same year. And by 1930, McCrea was an RKO contract player, building a reputation as a natural, reliable, leading man. Through the 1930s, he appeared in 38 films in a single decade. But 2 productions from 1932 connect him to one of the most famous movies ever made. McCrea starred in The Most Dangerous Game, an adventure thriller shot at night on the same jungle sets where King Kong was being filmed during the day. Same sets, same sound stages, same studio. McCrea was literally working on the King Kong sets every night. It gets better. McCrea was the original choice for the role that went to Bruce Cabot in King Kong. According to co-star Fay Wray, McCrea's agents demanded more money, and the part went to Cabot instead. One salary dispute separated him from one of the most iconic films in cinema history. And there's one more detail that perfectly captures McCrea's natural ease with animals. The Great Danes in The Most Dangerous Game were supposed to be loyal to the villain, but they kept breaking character to run over and play with Joel. The trainers couldn't stop them. The dogs didn't care about the script. They just liked McCrea. Number 3, the genius directors who fought to cast him. By the late 1930s, McCrea had become the leading man that Hollywood's greatest directors trusted with their most ambitious projects. Not because he was flashy, but because he was real. Cecil B. DeMille, the same. Man who'd once received his morning paper from a 9-year-old Joel, cast him in Union Pacific in 1939 and Wells Fargo in 1937, which made McCrea a major star. William Wyler directed him in Dead End in 1937, a Best Picture nominee opposite Humphrey Bogart. George Stevens directed The More the Merrier in 1943, earning 6 Oscar nominations. McCrea was commanding $10,000 per week by then, but his 2 most important collaborations were with Preston Sturges and Alfred Hitchcock. Sturges wrote Sullivan's Travels in 1941 specifically for McCrea. The film about the Hollywood comedy director who disguises himself as a hobo to learn about real suffering. It is now considered one of the greatest American comedies ever made. It holds a perfect score on Rotten Tomatoes and was selected for the Library of Congress National Film Registry. McCrea and Sturges got along beautifully. Joel later presented the director with a watch engraved, "For the finest direction I've ever had." He recalled Sturges' dialogue with admiration. "I used to tell him I'm not very good on long speeches, but with his, I would rattle them right off because they were so well written." Their second masterwork, The Palm Beach Story, in 1942, with Claudette Colbert, was later named one of the funniest movies of all time by the American Film Institute. Alfred Hitchcock's Foreign Correspondent in 1940 earned 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture. McCrea got the role after Gary Cooper turned it down. Cooper later said he regretted that decision. McCrea was characteristically honest about his place in Hollywood's pecking order. I got offered the comedies that Cary Grant passed on and the westerns that Gary Cooper rejected. But the films he made from those leftovers are still being watched and studied 80 years later. Hitchcock developed an unexpected fondness for McCrea's ranch lifestyle, asking Joel daily to bring fresh eggs and churned butter from his farm. McCrea's memories of the director are priceless. Hitchcock would fall asleep at dinner, never snoring, then wake up and ask if he'd missed anything. When Hitchcock told him he came downstairs in a scene like an elongated bag, McCrea's only response was, "I miss my horse." Number 4, 57 years, and the anniversary that stops you cold. The love story of Joel McCrea and Frances D. contains coincidences a screenwriter would reject as too perfect. They were born only a few blocks apart in the Los Angeles area. But Frances's family moved to Chicago during her childhood, and they never met until both were working in Hollywood. Their first encounter, around 1931, went badly. The McCrea's car pulled alongside Dee's at a red light. He tipped his hat. The very proper Frances considered this forward, since they hadn't been formally introduced, turned up her nose, and drove off. She left him sitting there in traffic. They crossed paths again on a Santa Monica beach in January 1933. But McCrea jogged by, apologized for his stubble, mentioned he'd been exercising his horses, and got her phone number. He called that night. They married on October 20th, 1933, in Rye, New York, and the circumstances were impulsive in the best way. Frances was at the Waldorf Astoria for a film shoot and called Joel to say she was looking out at the most exciting city in the world. He flew across the country despite hating air travel. "I never liked to be higher off the ground than on a horse." He drove to Rye, woke up a Methodist minister at 9 o'clock at night, and married Frances with the minister's wife as the only witness. They honeymooned driving through New England. Frances D. was a star in her own right. She appeared in Little Women in 1933 with Katharine Hepburn, was George Cukor's first choice for Melanie in Gone with the Wind, and starred in the Val Lewton horror classic I Walked with a Zombie. The marriage produced 3 sons: Jody, who became an actor, David, who ran ranches in New Mexico, and Peter. McCrea wisely encouraged Frances to keep acting, reasoning she might resent him later if he asked her to stop. He said of her, "She's a sticker-outer. You wouldn't think to look at that delicate, fragile beauty of hers, but she's one of the strongest human beings I've ever known." Now, here is the detail that stops you cold. Joel McCrea died on October 20th, 1990, their exact 57th wedding anniversary, of pneumonia at the Motion Picture Country House in Woodland Hills. He was 84. The man who married Frances D. on October 20th, 1933, left the world on October 20th, 1990, 57 years to the day. You couldn't write that ending, it happened. Frances lived until March 6, 2004, reaching 94. A caretaker who attended her in those final years said she always smiled when saying Joel's name and loved talking about his big hands. Number 5. Will Rogers and California Dirt and the richest cowboy in Hollywood. Joel McCrea's financial story might be more remarkable than his acting career, and it all traces back to one friendship. He met Will Rogers while both were at RKO, bonding over horses and roping. Rogers, the most beloved entertainer in America, gave McCrea 2 pieces of advice that would make him extraordinarily wealthy. First, save half of what you make and live on just the other half. Second, you're not worth nearly as much with a big house, a big car, and no land. When McCrea wanted to buy ranch land in 1933, he had no collateral. Rogers personally gave him a note to his banker and vouched for McCrea's character. The loan was approved that same day. McCrea bought roughly 1,000 acres in what was then empty, unincorporated Ventura County, land nobody wanted, land that would eventually become part of Thousand Oaks. He expanded to 3,000 acres, raising 150 to 200 head of cattle, producing 200,000 pounds of beef annually, and farming barley and oats. The ranch hosted Katharine Hepburn, Spencer Tracy, Gary Cooper, John Wayne, Clark Gable, and Maurice Chevalier. When Gable rode his motorcycle to the ranch, he was asked to leave because it was frightening the cows. That's how seriously McCrea took ranching. Then, California's post-war boom happened. McCrea sold 540 acres for $1.2 million in 1959. He sold 1,000 acres for $3 million in 1963. He sold another 1,200 acres to an oil company with the stipulation that drilling must never occur within sight of his home. McCrea privately admitted he'd made far more money in real estate than in 30 years of making pictures. He and Frances were rumored to be worth between $50 and $100 million by the 1970s. His most famous observation about money: "I put my money in land because I have never read about a bank being built on an actor's face." Will Rogers died in a plane crash in 1935, just 2 years after helping McCrea buy that first 1,000 acres. He never saw what his advice produced, but Joe McCrea spent the rest of his life proving Rogers right. Number 6. He met the real Wyatt Earp, then played him on screen. In 1928, while still a student at Pomona College, Joel McCrea met the real Wyatt Earp. The aging lawman spent his final years in Hollywood consulting with filmmakers. Earp died January 13, 1929. Only 7 years later, McCrea played Earp in Wichita in 1955, making him one of the very few actors in Hollywood history who personally met the historical figure he later portrayed on screen. When McCrea walked onto that set wearing the badge, he wasn't just acting, he was drawing on an actual memory of the man. McCrea also had an indirect connection to another legendary role. Gary Cooper hesitated about taking the lead in Sergeant York, worried because the real Alvin York was still alive. He consulted McCrea, who told him, "You ended up the hero, and you will too." Cooper took the role and won the Academy Award. That Oscar might never have happened without Joel McCrea's encouragement. Number 7. Why he walked away from everything except westerns. After The Virginian in 1946, Joel McCrea made a decision that baffled Hollywood. He announced he would work exclusively in westerns for the rest of his career. In a town where actors fought for variety and prestige, McCrea deliberately narrowed his range to a single genre. His reasoning was characteristically honest. "I like doing comedies, but as I got older, I was better suited to do westerns because I think it becomes unattractive for an older fellow trying to look young, falling in love with attractive girls." And then he said something that reveals who he really was. "The minute I got a horse and a hat and a pair of boots on, I felt easier. I didn't feel like I was an actor anymore. I felt like I was the guy out there doing it." He also turned down roles that violated his principles. He refused "The Postman Always Rings Twice," saying the character's moral standards were too low. When a studio chief demanded one reason, McCrea said, "I would be embarrassed to have my son see me in this picture." The executive offered him a western instead. Harry Warner once told McCrea and Gary Cooper together, "Humphrey Bogart can kick his mother on screen and get away with it, but you two are Kellogg's cornflakes guys. People buy tickets to see you that way. Don't disappoint them." Joel McCrea never did. Number 8. They Ride the High Country, the greatest farewell in Western history. In 1961, Randolph Scott called McCrea about a script concerning a couple of old Westerners, dinosaurs really, down on their luck and hard up for a buck. The director was a young Sam Peckinpah, making only his second feature film. The budget was roughly $750,000. The shooting schedule was 26 days. Nobody expected anything special. What they got was one of the finest westerns ever committed to film. Ride the High Country in 1962 paired McCrea and Scott as two aging former lawmen to transport gold from a mining camp. Originally, McCrea was cast as the charming rogue Gil Wistrom and Scott as the righteous lawman Steve Judd. Both actors were unhappy with their assignments. Independently, without knowing the other felt the same way. McCrea had never played a villain. Scott was tired of always being the straight arrow. When the producer facilitated a swap, both were relieved. His billing was settled by a coin toss at the Brown Derby restaurant. Scott won. Peckinpah made one structural change that transformed the film. He reversed which character dies at the end, having the good man perish instead of the rogue. That was revolutionary for 1962. MGM had no idea what they possessed. Studio head Joseph Vogel reportedly fell asleep during the rough cut and called it the worst picture he'd ever seen. Peckinpah was barred from the lot. His editor had to consult with him secretly, playing sound mixes over the phone. The studio dumped the film as the bottom half of double bills, but critics recognized genius. Newsweek named it one of the 10 best films of the year. The film became a major success in Europe and was selected for the Library of Congress National Film Registry. Western historian Brian Garfield called it a masterpiece, both the last of the old westerns and the first of the new. McCrea said with typical candor, "Both Randy and I were washed-up actors, playing washed-up lawmen." Scott retired immediately after the film, saying he'd never top this work. McCrea continued sporadically, making his final picture, Mustang Country, in 1976. He said simply, "After 87 pictures in 47 years, I knew when to quit." Number 9. The Quiet Man They Couldn't Change, in a town that constantly tried to reshape its stars. Joel McCrea refused every attempt. Studios wanted a nose job. He said, "No." Clip his widow's peak. No. Straighten his teeth. No. Change his name. Absolutely not. His answer was always the same. What you see is what you get. During World War II, McCrea was deferred from military service, married with 2 children, in his mid to late 30s. Many actors in similar situations took roles playing military heroes on screen. McCrea refused. His reasoning was quietly devastating. "Since I was too old to be called, I was too old for that kind of show." He wouldn't play make-believe soldiers while real men were dying. His self-assessment was always modest. "I have no regrets, except perhaps one. I should have tried harder to be a better actor." And his favorite response to critics who called him limited: "I'll say I'm a one-note actor, but the way I figure it, those other guys are just looking for that one right note." His favorite film wasn't a Sturges comedy or a Hitchcock thriller. It was Stars in My Crown from 1950, directed by Jacques Tourneur. McCrea called it the film he was most proud of. "I played a 19th century person who wore 6 guns." The Quiet Man's proudest role was a preacher who carried a pistol. Even his choices had layers. Number 10, The Ranch That Outlasted Hollywood. After his final film in 1976, McCrea spent his remaining years on what was left of the ranch, about 280 acres in Thousand Oaks. He rose early, worked the land, and lived the life that William S. Hart had described to a 9-year-old paperboy decades earlier. Go into the movies, make your money, buy a ranch. He did all 3 in exactly that order. His grandson, Wyatt McCrea, was about 10 years old before he realized his grandfather was anything more than a rancher. Joel never talked about Hollywood unless someone asked. When he died on that impossible anniversary in 1990, he was cremated and his ashes were scattered at sea, but the ranch survived. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. The Joel and Frances McCrea Ranch Foundation preserves it as a public park and living memorial. Joel McCrea made over 90 films in 47 years. He worked with Hitchcock, Sturges, DeMille, Wyler, Stevens, and Peckinpah. 2 of his films are in the Library of Congress. His comedies still get laughs. His westerns still hold up. His marriage lasted 57 years. His ranch became worth more than everything Hollywood ever paid him. And yet, he told anyone who asked exactly what he told the IRS decades earlier. He was a rancher. Acting was just the hobby that paid for it. You remember Joel McCrea in Sullivan's Travels, or Foreign Correspondent, or Ride the High Country? You weren't watching a performance. You were watching a man who happened to be exactly what the camera needed. Honest, steady, capable, and completely comfortable in his own skin. Hollywood tried to make him flashier. He wouldn't budge. Studios tried to change his face. He kept the one he was born with. Critics said he was limited. He said he was just looking for the right note. He found it, and he played it perfectly for 5 decades. Which moment surprised you most? The paperboy who delivered the Mills newspaper, meeting the real Wyatt Earp? The fortune built on Will Rogers' advice? The love story that ended on its own anniversary? Let us know in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories about real people who lived impossible lives. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed it. It truly helps us grow. Thanks for watching.